and thank everybody for joining. Thanks especially to our two guests today, uh, Matt Patino and Christina Yamanak-Vu. Matt Patino is adjunct professor in history at the Crafton Hills College, and Christina Yamanak-Vu is associate professor and department chair in history at Mount San Jacinto College. Today we're talking in the eighth and final session in our spring um, Careers for History Majors program here at Cal State San Bernardino. And we've covered a number of perspectives: state parks, national parks, teaching at the 7 to 12 level. We talked about museum work and archival work and a few other sessions. And today we're going to talk about teaching at the community college level, maybe particularly here in the region in Southern California and California, but also talk a little bit more about this field and um, how we students can best prepare to move into that field. So first, I'll just say a quick hello to my friends and neighbors, Matt Patino and Christina Yamanak-Vu. If either of you would like to say a quick hello and any opening remarks, and then we can move into some discussion and questions.
Matt, you can go first.
Oh, gee, thanks. My name is Matt Patino, as mentioned. I have been an adjunct now for it's a blur because if you count by semesters, it's several semesters, but I guess a little more than 2 years total time. I graduated from Cal State, got my master's there in 23, and then was hired pretty quickly. Um, so, and I came right back to where I started. It was always my intention never to get a PhD, regardless of Jeremy's prodding, but to settle on a master's because I only wanted to teach at a community college level, and which is what brought me here. And I managed to go full circle because I started out, received my first two associates at Crafton, and full circle came right back to where I began. So. That's my introduction. I'll answer questions later.
Thanks, Matt. Christina, do you want to hop in with a few opening remarks as well?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak as part of this panel discussion. I started out at UCLA, where I completed my undergraduate degree in history. I didn't always start out that way, so I thought I was going to become a management consultant and go on to business school and all this kind of stuff, and decided like 2 years into the program that history was something that just really ignited my intellectual imagination, and I shifted over to that degree. I took a year off. I was working over at the Getty, and I was there as an undergraduate intern the summer after I graduated from UCLA. And I was able to get a job for about a year, but in that time, I prepared to go back to graduate school, and I studied for the GRE, and I'd sent out applications, and was really lucky to come back to UCLA. And I was in a PhD program. I passed my oral exams, so I'm all but dissertation. I didn't finish my dissertation. I wound up getting a job. But it was an amazing experience, and I was really thankful when I was living abroad, actually doing some my research for my dissertation when I got an opportunity to teach at Mount San Jacinto College. I taught there for about a year and a half part-time, and then was lucky to get the full-time position. I've been here for close to 20 years, and I teach U.S. history, world history. I team teach a class with a biologist on the history of science. I also do what I was trained in, which is East Asian history, first and second half. So yeah, it's been a great ride.
Yeah.
That's a great intro because um, I think it from talking to a lot of a fair number of Cal State San Bernardino students, uh, there is a sort of sweet spot in teaching at the community college level for a lot of our students, and Matt and I have had long conversations about this, and you know that as a trajectory to find your way into that classroom. And I think for a lot of our students, maybe like you, Matt, um, there's a sense of having, um, well, for you, Christina, was at UCLA, but I think a lot of our students have it at a regional community college where the lights go on and you say, whoa, this is what I really want to go into great detail studying. This is what I'm excited to learn about. And our students often recognize that it was one of their instructors at a community college who really sparked that passion and that sort of open-ended inquiry and the desire to really delve deeper into that world. If you were talking to and this is our prime audience here, CSUSB undergrads
Mhm.
who may be in that same boat where they're very excited about kind of paying it forward and returning to the community college classroom as an instructor. What are a few of the things, and this will be the theme, but what are a few of the ideas that you think would be really important for them to not miss? Um, and again, that theme of what do I wish I'd known when I was in that position of being an undergrad to ensure that I thrive, that maybe I save some agony and time on my way there. Um, but just a few thoughts initially on that theme. I'm just open to both of you.
I think I would start with don't be afraid to change course. So when I first went back, because I started from scratch. So when I first went to Crafton, I started as a poli-sci major and didn't even think about history. It wasn't even on my radar until I met a history professor who, and she flat out told me, you realize you're a historian, you're not a political scientist. I'm like, I don't understand. She says, everything that you talk about has a historical bent to it. And she said, you really should consider history, change your major, because you can always bring history to politics. You can't always bring politics to history. And or, I'm sorry, the other way around. You can't. So, and I was like, okay, that makes perfect sense, and so I did. I ended up adding the major. So I ended up with two associate degrees, one in poli sci and one in history. And then I thought, well, the trajectory is just, to be discipline specific because I want to teach. I'll do the history undergrad and then the history major or history master's. And now I'm going back to get a second master's degree, this time in American studies. I've discovered everything is interdisciplinary. So you may start out as an undergrad thinking history, and this is the trajectory it's going to lead me to. It that may not be the end, and just be open to the fact that you could change course at any moment. And to me, as you asked me, an undergrad in history is certainly a door opener for a lot of opportunities. And then also, I was approached while I was an undergrad to get a credential to teach high school because there's a real need for high school social studies teachers. And I was never drawn to high school, mostly because I don't want to deal with the political end of it, and I really don't want to deal with the parents and have to deal with, having a committee determine what my curriculum should look like. So I shied away from that. But then I got hired at Crafton and they threw me directly into the lion's den. And my specialty has become teaching dual enrollment classes. So I'm teaching history survey courses to high school students. So again, whatever you set up for yourself, like I said, oh, I'll never do that. Guess what I'm doing?
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Christina, some thoughts about what our students should maybe bear in mind if they'd like to pursue this track.
I think one thing that was initially concerning, particularly to my parents, and also to me to some degrees. When I changed course, I wasn't quite clear what I was going to do with a history major. I just knew I liked it, and I felt like I was good at it. I was doing well in my classes. I was really excited about my education, and I felt empowered to do it in part because I was paying for my own way through college. And so I was like, I better study something that I like if I'm paying for it myself. But I think to know that it's okay if you're not quite certain yet what you're going to do with the degree and that those opportunities may unfold as you develop as a scholar. And so you might gravitate more towards academia, in which case you will become a teacher oftentimes. You might apply those skills to go to pursue a law degree. And just to know that there are many different avenues through which you can gain professional fulfillment with a history degree, that you're not limited just to one kind of trajectory. Mine is academia, but I think if you were to talk to me as a freshman in college, I would have said there is no way. I was painfully shy, never raised my hand in class. I was the one who was trying to hide in like a 20-person classroom, which is impossible to do. And it wasn't until I think I was a junior that I felt much more confident in my own abilities and to recognize that I had something that might other people might be interested in hearing. And that took a long time to kind of cultivate that sense of confidence and being able to participate in class. And ultimately to imagine myself on the other side of the podium where I actually did that as a profession, which would have been terrifying if I had like imagined that as a freshman. And to open that possibility that you as a scholar and as a student are going to develop, and so it may not necessarily be entirely clear, but it will start to become more clear the longer that you're doing something. And then for those who do decide to go into teaching, I think there are things that you can be doing now as undergraduate students. A couple things are to, if you think teaching is a possibility, to see if you can put yourself into situations where you're helping other students. So it could be lower stakes things like informal tutoring of your friends in class. It could be more formal jobs that you pursue at the institution where you are hired to serve as a tutor. Depending on the institution, there may be opportunity to support your instructors. So working as a peer assistant, for example, in a classroom space, um, and if you're taking like an upper division course, then to see if there's a possibility of you giving a mini guest lecture just to see what it's like to actually be a presenter in a class, or if there's options in which you can practice delivering oral presentations as an option for a research project to really embrace that opportunity. So you can see sort of what it's like. And as instructors, we have a lot of different types of classroom environments. Some might be seminars, some might be larger classroom spaces of 40 people. For those interested in pursuing a job at a, major research institution, your classrooms might be even larger than that, depending on what kind of courses you teach. So making those, I think, opportunities for yourself to interact as much as possible with students, I think is a piece of advice I would give.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Christina.
could I add
Sorry, jump in,
to
Matt.
that? So my own experience, I started very quickly. I tutored. I was a writing tutor at Crafton and a writing tutor at Redlands. And then when I got to San Bernardino, I became an SI, supplemental instructor. So they're all, I mean, there are various avenues for you to explore teaching, and it's not always necessarily in front of a classroom. It could be a very small group or one-on-one, and all of that experience is really valuable because you learn how to convey your message to a student in a variety of ways. Because what I've noticed in teaching is that it may make sense to you in your head, but that message is not always conveyed, and sometimes your audience has to tell you how to understand it.
Thanks both. And I put some links to some of those opportunities in the uh, chat, and I'll also share them out when I share the video. But things like the supplemental instruction program, um, which is the first time I went out to Mount San Jacinto. I went out there maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago. Must have been six because it was before COVID. Um, the uh, the supplemental instruction program is a really vibrant way to get in the classroom in a kind of mixed learning sort of space. And you may be in a non-history class, so that interdisciplinarity aspect of it is exciting as well. Uh, this flexibility point is a theme that's been coming up over all of the sessions that we've been doing, in terms of not knowing what you don't know. And I often had, well, I remember I was like this as an undergrad as well. Had a very clear idea of what I was going to be, what I was going to do. Um, and then, you take a class or you have a conversation or something happens, and um, exciting new avenues open up, and that becomes, what ultimately is the thing that draws you the most. And I think there's a sense of that a little bit among our students, and it may just be I may be biased because these are historians who are sort of inherently flexible and omnivorous, and thinking about the world so broadly. Um, but in terms of the interdisciplinarity question and what is asked of typically of somebody teaching at the community college level, um, I know at the 7 to 12 level, there's a sense of uh, being ready to teach um, government, being ready to teach economics, being ready to teach something like that at the high school level. Is that also the case um, in terms of being the strongest candidate for a position when you're applying?
I would say at my institution, the largest number of courses that instructors across the board, both full-time and part-time teach is U.S. history. So I wasn't trained as a U.S. historian, but I've come to learn U.S. history and it's become one of my favorite classes to teach. So to make yourself, I think, as marketable as possible, I would say to be ready to teach the first and second half of U.S. history alongside of our other core classes, which is world history. So the first and second half of world history. Those are our four main classes. Anything else that we do is like a what we would term a specialty course. With the exception of Western Civ. Western Civ, we do have a very limited number of those that we still offer. But those six classes constitute the core six, and anything beyond that are specialty courses that we periodically have an opportunity to teach. So I think most job postings, especially for full-time positions, will have something in there about the ability to teach U.S. history, world history, perhaps both. And they
Mhm.
may also be, in addition to that, there might be a particular specialization that that department is looking for. It might be,
Mhm.
for example, something related to Black history, um, Latin American history, or something similar. But I think US is typically the most common.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been fortunate. I'm a U.S. historian, and I have lucked out that people that are more senior to me snap up the world history classes. So I get to stay in my sweet spot. Um, as far as interdisciplinary, because I'm teaching high schoolers primarily, um, what are different from the typical college age is the typical college age, I can kind of stick to my script. This is U.S. history, I can kind of keep it in broad strokes. But for the high school students, I notice that they respond better if I can put them in history. So it's not just U.S. history I'm teaching local history as well. So I'm teaching the history of Redlands or the history of San Bernardino Valley, so that they can make a connection. They can see that, where they live has a place in history. So it may not be world history, but there is that little tweak I've done.
Thanks. This is giving us a lot to go on. In terms of some essential mechanics here when you're applying or when Christina, I assume, looking at applications and reviewing applications. Um, the master's in history seems to be a standard requirement. We have temporarily paused our MA application program here at Cal State as we navigate a few things in terms of um, departmental college matters. So we're not sure where that stands. But there are other regional Master of Arts in History programs and Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Social Sciences. Um, are those the main aims in terms of qualifications? And do others, such as, for example, the teaching credential, does that have a benefit or is that largely irrelevant? The single subject teaching credential, which would be mainly for 7 to 12 level. But Matt, you find yourself teaching mixed classrooms with high school students in them as well. Uh, so is that a situation where the single subject credential was relevant, or was it still just the expectation that the MA in history is um, the main qualification?
Well, to get the position, the at least a bachelor's in Christina. I'm not sure if San Jack is different, but for our district. I could have a master's in political science, but as long as I have an undergrad in history, I'd still be able to teach history. Although the preference is to have the master's specific to the discipline. Um, Now, as far as teaching, these 11th and 12th graders that I have, um, what was really helpful for me was taking Michelle Lorimer's class, which is teaching within the discipline, because she actually shows you how to adhere to the 712 state standards. Um, I had an undergrad professor who told me that the one thing that he regretted is that they don't teach professors how to teach. So other things I've had to learn along the way, and I had had some exposure to this prior in a different job, and that's learning um, how students learn, creating a lesson plan that scaffolds, meaning you're introducing a concept that you're just going to build upon throughout the semester or throughout the quarter, making sure that at the end you've reached a goal that you set at the beginning. One of the things I do is very early on, my quizzes and exams are multiple choice. And then as we progress, by the midterm, it's about 50-50. And then by the final, it's mostly essay responses. Because now I should have had them fully engaged with the materials. It's doing things like that.
Hmm.
Um, so I think for me, in terms of and can you remind me of the question again? Where are we going?
Well, qualifications, the MA
Oh, yeah.
qualification, but then also the role of, for example, like a teaching credential or
Right.
skills in
Okay.
teaching.
So his master's in history is usually the minimum requirement, although there are kind of different permutations of that, as Matt was alluding to. I would say certainly the master's in history is the preference. I think one thing, though, as you imagine yourself in terms of graduate school, is to know that sometimes terminal master's degrees don't have funding, but PhD programs do, and you can pick up your master's degree along the way. Um, and it's not a requirement at my community college to have a PhD to teach at the community college level. It certainly is not going to hurt you. They do want to see, especially if you have a PhD, like what would be the rationale for teaching at community college. So you want to kind of explain that trajectory of like, why is community college the preference compared to like teaching at a major research institution? If a lot of your graduate training has been centered around research and publication and those types of things, how does community college fit into that, timeline? And so you have to kind of center yourself if you do pursue that advanced degree. But in terms of costs, you could potentially be funded for a 4 to 5 year program for a PhD. And after 2 years, you might decide, okay, I'm going to get my master's just to make sure. There's sometimes high attrition rates in PhD programs. In my program, in my year, 50% of us did not finish the dissertation. We all got jobs doing different things. Um, but that things may have changed at this point. But I would just say in terms of exploring what type of graduate school, know that PhD programs you can pick up your master's en route. Um, and then I think just the single subject thing, I don't know if that really bears any weight. It's not something I think we necessarily look at, but certainly any type of teaching experience or training that you have isn't going to hurt you. It could, just amplify your portfolio that much more.
Yeah, that's great. And the the advice of um, uh, you know, getting into a funded PhD program, which is a little bit redundant, hopefully, to say a funded PhD program. I've heard a few folks who are shopping around and had PhD programs that were not funded, and for those, I think unless you are independently wealthy, you run for the hills. I don't think that's a great or I mean there may be some situations where you cobble together funding and a close advisor could say, don't worry, I'm going to make sure that you're all set. But for the most part, you get a promise of a funding package at a PhD program, and that is a key difference with a PhD and the MA. That gives us a few good points to jump off of. In terms of applying, I think I recommend to my students, whether they want to teach at the 7 to 12 level, whether they want to apply to MA programs and teach at the community college level, whether they want to apply to PhD programs, um, to think about how they would teach and to pay attention in their classes to what their instructor is doing. And maybe think, oh, that seems to work, or I really don't like that. I would never do that. Or, things along those lines when they're same as when they're reading a monograph or when they're, a PhD dissertation turned a book. You can sort of reverse engineer it. And the same with a good lecture, hopefully, or a lousy lecture. Think sort of what happened there, and what would I do differently. So I recommend students do that. I also recommend that they think about um, cobbling together their own syllabi and drafting their own syllabi. And it's pretty easy to find a lot of materials online for all these different courses and see what books are being used, what documents are being used. Often it's nice to find free materials to teach with. Um, is that a good idea in terms of drafting your own syllabi even before you've taught the class, but have a sort of prospective draft syllabus that reflects you and your personal approach to the subject?
I think so because you most likely, whether you're interviewing for a part-time or full-time position, are going to be taught asked about your teaching methodology. And so
Mhm.
if you've already kind of gone through the process of constructing a class, you can speak from that experience even without having taught it. So you might have a particular approach in which you're looking at the subject matter, some themes that you are hoping to highlight. The You might have and place an emphasis on free and accessible text. So you might have selected an OER book that you could talk about. You might have wrapped your mind around issues of equity and diversity in the classroom space, and you'd be ready to talk about that if
Mhm.
asked. So I think even in situations where you don't have the opportunity to speak directly from experience of being in front of a classroom, by doing those kind of preliminary steps, your answers could be more fleshed out than otherwise. I think the hardest thing is getting your first opportunity. Showing on a resume that you have no teaching experience, it's harder to get your foot in the door.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
have to probably have a pretty good recommendation. You're recommended to somebody. So you have to be persistent, I think. It took me a long time to get an opportunity to teach here. I sent out a lot of resumes. And it's like I had a lot of teaching experience as a TA, which is not the same
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
teaching your own class. I had experience teaching in Japan, which is not the same as, you know, teaching at the community college level. So you have to be persistent. You can't give up. But then once you have that opportunity, it certainly you can build on it. And that's just the thing I would say. And absolutely constructing a sample class is going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely knowing, I think what your own personality is, because, even in the 2 years I've been teaching, my class has evolved. And I find myself being more of a social historian as opposed to some of my counterparts who I've talked to them and I've seen their syllabi, and it may be more of a military history bent, or they'll follow a theme that is of greater interest to them. And so that definitely helps drive the class differently. Yeah, as you mentioned, Christina, if you're very concerned about race and diversity in the classroom, your curriculum may also reflect that. Because like I said, you want to make sure you're reaching the students ultimately. And like you said, Jeremy, you can learn something from a bad lecture, just like you can from a good lecture. And I've seen it, people that just get up and talk, and 90 minutes of that, you're putting people to sleep. So how do you keep your students engaged? I mine is part lecture, mine is part video, mine is part hands-on. It's, you mix it up.
Yeah, and that I also would echo your endorsement of Professor Lorimer's 5700 class here at Cal State. That's a terrific class if you can get in there.
Yeah.
Um, it's often and I think Professor Michael Karp out at Palm Desert campuses, teaching that as well. Um, and I know I want to note that we do need to wrap up in a little under 10 minutes. We do need to wrap up. Christina noted that she needed to run. Um,
I do too.
but a quick question about just following on these sort of job application materials, pedagogy statements, and then and sort of what you look for in there. And then I also was interested in your thoughts on what's going on in the classroom now with technology and um, how we keep this as a rigorous space. But first, a quick note: if you have any thoughts on pedagogy statements, that's often a little bit of a cipher for some folks, especially like Matt said, if you haven't taken a pedagogy class or been taught how to teach. Um, what should a student think about when they're starting to articulate their ideas of themselves as a teacher if they don't have a lot of experience in the classroom teaching?
I
I think
think
for me, because I'm sorry,
go for it.
I think for me, because before I came back to school, I supervised trainers at Riverside County. So, and everything that we taught, even the soft skills stuff that we taught there through HR, was built on a pedagogy because that's what my manager wanted. She had an education background. We everything was scaffolded. Everything it was very specific. But for somebody first building one, I would always ask what appealed to you? How did you learn this? And then build from there. And I think it's sort of kind of that working backwards sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think thinking about their own experiences as students, which instructors and which classroom spaces work the best for them, if they had any opportunity to engage with other students in different types of capacities. So it doesn't have to be teaching experience, but just different spaces through which they thought through what is the best way that I've learned and how would I like
Mhm.
students in my classroom space to learn. Um, Also kind of weaving in a story of themselves. I think a lot of the things that Matt was saying today is, I think, one of the major shifts in the way that we imagine history is to make sure that the people who are taking the class feel represented, and they feel represented through the curriculum, the material that we're having them explore, through the projects that they do. They're not just writing standard research papers anymore, but creative projects that gives them
Mhm.
a space to take agency over their own process of learning that oftentimes is informed by various different identities that they embrace. And so, if thinking through their own education, which they'll have a long history to kind of draw from, that can help shape what kind of teacher they would like to be. Not the teacher that maybe others expect them to be, but rather the
Yeah.
teacher that they want to be.
You mentioned something about creative learning. The old saying that you learn by doing, and that's one of the things I've embraced in my classrooms is to give a creative outlet. So at the end, I expect a class project. It doesn't have to be an essay. I've offered my students the opportunity to create a video that might be YouTube worthy, create a podcast, teach me about the subject that interested you. And that I think gives them an ownership over the topic or the subject that they haven't had before.
Those are some great things to keep in mind. And they apply, I think, across the board, whether somebody's thinking about teaching at the 7 to 12 level, teaching at the community college level, or going for the PhD, where, like you said, Matt, I think pedagogy is often neglected in that training, unfortunately. Um, a, a couple of thoughts, and I know this is something that we could talk about probably for hours and hours and hours, but the latest developments in terms of the easy accessibility of sort of mimicry in these commercial LLMs, um, has that had a major impact on your classroom and the way that you think about your assignments, the ease with which a student could, for example, provide a reading reflection or a research paper that looks the part using one of these commercial LLMs, ChatGPT or something else? Has that had a big impact on the way that you think about the classroom, on the way that you design your syllabi and administer your assignments? Or or is it slightly overblown in terms of the impact on your pedagogy?
It's not
So
overblown.
it's not, no. It's funny because you and I talked about this yesterday, Jeremy. I give my students, they have a weekly, because we go through roughly a chapter a week, but they have a weekly response paper that they're required to do. I don't direct them what they have to write about. It's whatever piqued their interest. And in a period of about 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, now I know their voices. I understand how they write and I recognize their voice. So by the time they're turning in an essay or something that's more substantial, um, I can pretty quickly spot if they wrote it or not, whether or not it's in their voice. And so yeah, I've had it happen. I was surprised it happened so early in my career, but I have had someone turn in something that was completely manufactured. And it's now you kind of have to deal with the disciplinary end of teaching. Excuse me. But fortunately for me, it hasn't happened as on a larger scale, which I my students, and this is going to change, I know, next year because they're high schoolers, they still have their phones in their hands. Next school year, they can't even have the phone in the classroom. So it's going to get locked up next year. So we'll see if there's another change coming.
That's good news. Lock up the
I
Yeah.
think
phone.
it depends on what type of class, what modality you're teaching in, that you have to develop different strategies depending on that modality. For in-class assignments, exams, etc., a lot of instructors at my institution have brought back the blue book. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
there a lot of in class, like there's nothing on Canvas anymore. Like there might have
Yeah.
been some things that you're doing online, submitting online, so on. But now the trend is like, let's have you go ahead and produce it in class. Let's have you take the exam in class. So there has been a recognition, actually, in our department, we've probably been seeing this going on. This has been an issue and a major issue probably for 3+ years. And it's really with the introduction of the AI checker that we became much more cognizant of
Yeah.
it, where it seems suddenly like, wow, people are really good, which they are.
Yeah.
They're amazing students. But we also had seen an increase in the utilization of these
Yeah.
various enhancement tools. And so I think the sort of one response could be in the classroom is that you find creative ways of accomplishing the same things of what you want out of an assessment in the classroom space. The challenges with online is that you only have so many places to pivot to, but you can be creative and to some degree it can be effective until the AI catches up.
Right.
So it could be things like you're giving students options of doing things that are going to be harder for AI to replicate. Um, every time we take these steps, it seems like AI catches up. But personalizing, which AI sometimes has a difficulty kind of manufacturing the lived experience of a particular student in which they're responding to, well, comment on the professor's lecture, right? This recorded lecture that you have to listen to and incorporate your analysis of it as part of this. And so having them do something that's specific to the course and having to comment on it is one option. Another could be like quoting from particular sources that are embedded in sort of your library database. It might be going into an archive, having them
Yeah.
do an assignment that's related to a particular archive where they have to enter into, which might make it more difficult for the AI. We've also seen very recently, however, that AI is catching up and it's able to do more and more things, including going through an entire module, reading the assignments, reading everything that's listed there, and then doing the work for the student. So it's kind of very scary territory. And sort of where we go with this, I'm not certain. I don't know if anybody has really clear answers yet. But I think the best thing is that for those who are interested in teaching at community college, the reality is that you probably are going to have to be prepared to teach in both the in-person as well as online spaces. And AI is going to be an issue. We don't know how it's going to fully manifest itself because it keeps evolving. But to prepare yourself as best as you can to market yourself as an online instructor, so doing like trainings for Canvas, being familiar with the Canvas system, taking advantage of any opportunity to be certified in online education, so that if you're asked to teach an online course very quickly, you could say, not only do I have an experience as a student in using Canvas, but I also have gone through certain types of trainings that will make me very ready to enter into the classroom through the Canvas environment.
That's really great advice. And oh, we lost Matt. Um, and also thinking in terms of sort of state of the art um, journals and advice and kind of recent presentations or trainings like that are going to be available for students who are on the lookout for them. So I think that's a really good point to move toward wrapping up on. And I know I think that Matt had to run, and I know that you also have to run, Christina. Thank you so much for joining us. This really gave us a lot to think about. And again, it's sort of across the board in terms of pedagogy, but also really focused on that teaching at the community college level. I want to let you go, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us today to share this, to share your perspective and your wisdom and your experience. It's always great to catch up, and I look forward to talking again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.